Namaste, candidates. Welcome to this study session on stress testing, part of the FRM Part 1 curriculum. So, this is a theoretical chapter, and many candidates they actually find theory based readings in FRM Part 1 a little more abstract or challenging than the quantitative ones. So, in this session, we have taken special care to make every concept clear, structured, and also exam focused. So, our goal is to simplify the ideas while keeping them fully aligned with the GARP learning objectives so that what you learn here directly maps to what is relevant for the exam. So, we'll go through the entire topic comprehensively. We'll cover what stress testing is. We'll see why it is important, how institutions and regulators use it, what are the different models, how it complements measures like VAR, expected shortfall, and by the end of this session, you'll not only understand the conceptual framework, but also you'll be able to link it to exam style questions, particularly theory questions. So let's start. Okay, so let us quickly look at the learning objectives of this chapter. We'll see the rationale for stress testing. We'll see the relationships between stress testing and other risk measures. We'll see stressed VAR and stressed ES. Then we'll see the considerations in scenario development. Then we'll see reverse stress testing and regulatory stress testing. We'll see the responsibilities of board of directors, the senior management audit function in governance. Then we'll see the framework, governance framework. And finally, we'll see the Basel stress testing principles. So let's start. Stress testing has become one of the most important tools in modern risk management. So, in this slide, as part of the first learning objective, we'll explore why stress testing matters, okay, what makes them essential, and how they complement traditional risk measures. Now, the 2007-2008 financial crisis, it exposed major weaknesses in conventional risk management. Measures like VAR and expected shortfall, they worked well during normal times, but they failed to capture the magnitude of the losses, the feedback loops, and the market wide contagion that unfolded during that crisis. In response, stress testing emerged as an essential tool. You can say it became a central part of the risk manager's toolkit. So instead of asking how likely an event is, stress testing asks what would happen if that kind of event, that extreme event occurs. Okay, those events which standard models might miss. Now, stress testing complements measures like VAR and ES. Now, these two measures, VAR and ES, they actually summarize the losses, you can say, within a statistical range. While stress testing examines the far tails and the catastrophic outcomes, okay, it captures systemic stresses and captures the tail risks properly. Now, ultimately, every stress test uh, leads to a crucial question. Does the institution have enough capital and liquidity to survive any kind of extreme shock? So, stress testing ensures that resilience is tested before a real crisis occurs. So, the true rationale for stress testing is preparation, you can say, not prediction. Okay, it helps institutions understand their vulnerabilities and strengthen them before the markets put them to the test. Now, to understand how stress testing fits with other risk measures, first, let's recap these two key tools in risk management that we have done in part one: value at risk or VAR, and expected shortfall or ES. Now, the VAR statement tells us how confident we can be that losses will stay within a particular limit over a defined time period. For example, if we say that the one day 99% VAR is $10 million, it means that there is only a 1% chance that the losses will exceed that amount, say $1 million, on that particular day. Now, expected shortfall goes one step further. It tells us if losses do exceed the VAR level, how large those losses are expected to be on an average. So while VAR gives a threshold, ES gives the average loss beyond that threshold. Okay. Now together, VAR and ES, they describe a statistical view of potential losses, but Both depend heavily on historical data and probability assumptions. And that is exactly where stress testing begins to add value. Now, as we discussed, traditional measures, they like VAR and ES, they give valuable information, no doubt about that. But they share a limitation. They actually look backward, not forward. Now, VAR and ES, they rely on estimated probability distributions derived from historical market behavior or market data. In other words, they assume that the future will, kind of be looking like the past. Stress testing changes that perspective. It is actually forward looking. It is built around what if, the scenarios that explore how the institution will perform under extreme but plausible market conditions, which this actually helps risk managers prepare for situations that lie outside of standard experience. Okay, so while VAR and ES are statistical and backward looking tools, stress testing is scenario based and forward looking. It is actually a powerful combination when used together. Okay, now let us compare VAR ES analysis versus stress testing. Let's bring both approaches together and see how they complement each other in an enterprise wide risk framework. So, VAR ES analysis, they actually cover a wide range of possible outcomes based on historical data. And stress testing focuses on limited number of well defined adverse scenarios, you can say. So, VAR analysis relies heavily on historical probability distributions. And for stress testing, they don't rely on probabilities. They actually instead directly assess the impact. Then, as far as time horizon is concerned, VAR and ES usually cover shorter periods such as 1 to 10 days for market risk, while stress testing spans longer time horizons, sometimes 3 months to 24 months, several years, you can say. Then VAR ES analysis considers both favorable and adverse scenarios, whereas stress testing only considers unfavorable scenarios. Then VAR and ES, they can be actually back tested because they describe the frequency of losses within a distribution. Whereas stress testing, it cannot be back tested in that way because it focuses on extreme events that rarely occur. Okay. So finally, you can say that the ultimate goal of stress testing is to integrate all business areas, credit, market, operational liquidity, all these risks to determine whether the organization has sufficient capital and liquidity to withstand severe macroeconomic shocks or not. Okay, so in practice, while VAR and ES analysis they are quantifying likely losses, stress testing is exploring unlikely but catastrophic ones. So when they are used together, they give management a complete view. Okay, a view which is, you can say, grounded in data, and it helps the management to prepare for the unknown. Now let us understand stressed VAR and ES. Now in the previous section, we saw how stress testing complements traditional risk measures. Now let us look at where these two worlds meet. These two worlds meet in stressed VAR and stressed ES. These measures blur the line between traditional VAR ES and stress testing by using data from particularly stressful historical periods. Traditional VAR ES are usually calculated using data from the most recent 1 to 5 years. Daily risk changes in risk factors during this period, they are used to estimate potential losses. So essentially, these measures assume that the near future will behave like the recent past. Stressed VAR and ES, on the other hand, they use data from a severe market turmoil period, okay, like the 2008 financial crisis. This means that they model what losses might look like if that crisis period were to repeat. Now, because these measures are built from crisis data, they are conditional on a repeat of that period. So that is they estimate the potential losses given a repeat of that stress. So in this sense, you can say stressed VAR and stress ES are like historical stress testing, just embedded inside a VAR kind of framework. Now, an important distinction is that stressed VAR and ES they focus on the worst T days during that crisis period, which gives a short-term snapshot of tail risk. Stress testing, on the other hand, often considers the impact of the entire crisis year repeating, which provides a much longer enterprise wide perspective. So you can say that stressed VR and ES, they serve as kind of a bridge. They retain the structure of VR and ES, but they are powered by the data of a stress test. Well, let us look at why stressed VR and ES gained prominence and what their limitations are. So let's look at the advantages first. One of their key strengths is realism, you can say. By drawing data from the actual crisis, from any actual crisis, they capture the kinds of vulnerabilities that emerge only under severe market stress. They also provide conservative estimates of potential losses, which is especially valuable for setting regulatory capital or internal buffers. So they help institutions to ensure that they are not underestimating their exposure. Finally, stressed measures increase awareness of tail and systemic risks, which shows how different parts of the portfolio might behave under extreme but plausible conditions. But of course, these benefits come with their own limitations because stressed VR and ES rely on a single historical period. They are not forward looking. They assume that a future crisis will behave like a past one. They also can't be back tested in the same way traditional VR can. We learn more about this back testing in part 2. Since because the stressed conditions rarely repeat with statistical frequency. And finally, they may overstate risk sometimes when market conditions are calm because input data entirely comes from a period of panic. Okay. So while stress testing measures are more conservative, they are also less adaptable. They show what happened in the worst of times, not necessarily what lies ahead. Now let us compare traditional VR ES with stress VR ES and also with stress testing based on various aspects. Let's start with the data period. So traditional VR ES, they are based on the most recent, you can say 1 to 5 years of historical data. Of course, they assume that recent market behavior is a reasonable guide to what could happen next. Stressed VR and ES, on the other hand, they are calculated using data from a known crisis period. For example, 2008 market financial crisis. So the idea is to capture the risk profile that would emerge if conditions similar to that of that stress environment were to repeat. Stress testing moves even further away from pure historical data. It is driven by macroeconomic scenarios that are defined either by the management or regulators. We'll see these things later on. Things like maybe a deep recession or a spike in interest rates or a collapse in liquidity. Next, let's look at the focus of each approach. Traditional VR and ES are designed to measure risk under typical market behavior, the sort of fluctuations we see most of the time. Stressed VR and ES, they zoom in on the worst T days within a crisis period. So they ask if those extreme days returned, what losses might we face? Stress testing broadens the horizon. Instead of looking at isolated days, it evaluates the impact of an entire crisis period or even a scenario that is worse than any past crisis unfolding over many months. The time horizon also differs. So we have seen this. Traditional VR and ES usually cover short periods, 1 to 10 days, because they are used for daily risk control and capital allocation. Stressed VR and ES keep this same short horizon, but they apply it under extreme market conditions. Stress testing, by contrast, it typically spans several months or even years. Okay, it considers how sustained pressure would affect capital, profitability, and liquidity across the organization. Now consider back testing. Traditional VR can be back tested. As I told earlier, we'll see this in part 2 in more detail since it predicts how often losses should exceed given a given threshold, you can say. We can check those predictions against the actual outcomes. Stressed VAR cannot be backtested in this same way, of course, because it is based on a rare event, right? That rare event may not repeat again in the same form. And for stress testing, backtesting simply does not apply. Stress tests are just hypothetical exercises, not probabilistic forecasts. Okay. Finally, the output of each method reflects its nature, you can say. Traditional VR and ES, they produce a statistical loss range, a view of likely losses based on normal market patterns. Stressed VER and ES, they generate a conditional stressed loss range. What losses would look like if a specific crisis occurs. Stress testing produces an enterprise-wide impact, you can say, assessment. It tells management how the entire institution would perform under a very severe, but again, I'm using this word again and again, severe but plausible scenario. Okay, so in a sense, these approaches, you can say, they sit on a continuum. Traditional VER and ES, they quantify probable loss. Stressed VER and ES, they take it to the extreme. And of course, stress testing, does the things about the unimaginable. So there is a spectrum of vulnerability from everyday volatility to systemic crisis. Now let us see how to choose stress test scenarios. Now the first step in building any stress test is to choose a suitable time horizon. Most scenarios, they span from 3 months to 2 years, typical, long enough for losses, liquidity effects and recovery patterns to unfold. Then the chosen horizon should reflect the nature of the risk. For example, market shocks may play out in weeks, while insurance or pension risks might evolve over decades. Now, scenarios may be prescribed by regulators or designed internally. Internal scenarios are often more insightful because they reflect the firm's unique exposures and strategy. Now, let us talk about historical scenarios. Now, one common method is to anchor the scenarios in real historical crises because these provide tested realistic data patterns and clear intuition. Risk managers often use events like the 2008 financial crisis or Russia's 1998 default as templates to replace similar stresses on current portfolios. Now, in constructing such scenarios, some variables are shocked in absolute terms, for example, an interest rate increase of, say, 2%, while others follow proportional changes, like equity prices falling down by 30%. The aim is basically to mimic how different risk factors behave during that historical period. Now, sometimes a historical scenario can be amplified, maybe doubling or tripling the magnitude of past movements to test resilience under more extreme but still plausible scenarios. This helps reveal whether an institution could withstand a crisis that is worse than already what has happened. However, linear scaling can mislead. During genuine crisis, correlations across markets, across different asset classes, they rise sharply, which means just multiplying past movements, it kind of understates the true systemic impact. Now, recognizing these non-linear effects is one of the biggest challenges in historical data for stress testing. Now, another approach is to stress specific key variables, those that drive the largest exposures. This method is simpler than a full macroeconomic simulation, but still it reveals valuable insight about concentration as well as directional risk. Typical examples include a 200 basis points rise in all interest rates, a 25% decline in equities, or a 4% increase in unemployment. These changes are intentionally large to explore how balance sheet will respond when core market assumptions break down completely. Now, stressing individual variables, it helps to quantify which positions or business lines are most sensitive to certain shocks. For example, a rate sensitive portfolio may show steep losses under a rate hike, even if other market variables they stay stable. The limitation, though, is that these single variable tests do not capture the complex market dynamics. When several factors move together, as they do in real crisis, the combined impact can be much greater. Non-linear interactions make multivariable stress testing far more challenging, but of course, far more realistic as well. Okay, ad hoc scenarios. Ad hoc scenarios are forward looking and designed around current vulnerabilities and, of course, possible future shocks rather than the past ones. They rely heavily on judgment and qualitative insights, professional judgment and qualitative insights, you can say. Now, these scenarios might represent unique or unprecedented event. For example, a major political decision, a sudden change in regulation, or a policy shock like Brexit. They help institutions prepare for kind of events that lack historical parallels. They are usually developed through structured brainstorming among senior leaders or risk committees. Bringing together business heads, economists, and strategists, it helps to ensure that each scenario reflects multiple viewpoints and organizational realities. Now, the real value of ad hoc scenarios is that they push management to think creatively, not about what has happened, okay, but about what could happen next. This mindset helps institutions anticipate emerging risks before they materialize, which encourages diverse perspectives. Governance and the use of results. Now, strong governance ensures stress testing influences real decisions. When senior management participates in defining scenarios, they kind of develop ownership of the process and they are more likely to act on the results. Stress testing findings should feed directly into the strategy and capital planning, not sit as reports on a shelf. Okay, they should drive changes in funding, hedging, or risk limits where different vulnerabilities are uncovered. Now, one persistent challenge is behavioral challenge. Decision makers tend to focus on what they see as most likely and dismiss unlikely scenarios as irrelevant. Stress testing forces leadership to confront those uncomfortable possibilities. In the end, the purpose of stress testing isn't to forecast the next crisis, it is actually to prepare for it. It helps institutions strengthen resilience long before the shock arrives. Now, foundations of model building. When constructing a stress testing model, we start by distinguishing between core and peripheral variables. Core variables are those which are explicitly defined in the scenario, like GDP growth, unemployment, or interest rates. Peripheral variables are those indirectly affected by these drivers, like credit spreads, loan losses, profitability. The goal is to understand how core movements transmit across the balance sheet. To capture these relationships realistically, models should rely on data from stressed periods, not normal market conditions. Now, we all know that during crisis, correlations, volatilities, and risk sensitivities they behave very differently. So, studying past stress data helps calibrate how variables actually behave under extreme pressure. A common modeling approach is regression analysis, linking peripheral variables to the core variables. However, these relationships have to be interpreted carefully because they often change in stressed environments. Simple statistical fits from normal periods can underestimate tail effects. Finally, expert judgment is very important, very crucial. Even strong models cannot predict how easily a firm could raise capital, access liquidity, or adapt operations in a crisis. Analysts must combine quantitative evidence with informed managerial judgment and insight. Okay, let us see some application examples. For credit risk, you can say that in credit risk modeling, rating agency data can be tied to macro variables like GDP and unemployment, GDP growth and unemployment. This relationship helps estimate defaults under each scenario. Now, next example we can take of recovery rates. So, recovery rates also tend to decline in downturns. Adjusting them ensures loss estimates reflect real stressed market conditions. Next example for market risk. We know that for market risk, profitability and asset valuations often depend on movements in equity prices, interest rates, and overall economic growth. So, if you relate these factors, it will actually help simulate trading and revenue impacts. Then, reliable external data like long term credit statistics from rating agencies and macroeconomic databases, they provide an empirical foundations for these models, which actually strengthens their credibility. Now, let us talk about knock on effects and systemic feedback using an example also. Now, effective stress testing, it must go beyond direct losses and include these indirect or second round knock on effects. These occur when firms or market react to stress in ways that intensify the original problems. Now, in a crisis, behavior changes. Banks hold liquidity, investors sell risky assets, and borrowers default strategically. These actions amplify market pressure and deepen losses across the system. So, if you remember, a clear example was the US housing crisis of 2005 2008, which we have done in detail in Foundations of Risk Management. Falling home prices, it caused some owners to walk away from mortgages, which flooded the market with foreclosures, and it drove prices even lower. This is kind of an example of a classic feedback loop. Now, at the same time, investors they fled to safer assets, credit spreads widened, and interbank lending froze. So capturing these interlinkages, these correlation breakdowns, these funding stresses where credit market and liquidity risks enforce each other is one of the toughest challenges in stress testing modeling. So you can say that building stress testing models is as much about judgment as it is about analytics. The important factor is to model how risk factors interact under pressure, not just in isolation. Okay, it has to be recognized that behavior and feedback can turn moderate shocks into large scale crisis. Because good models don't just measure, small scale vulnerability. They help institutions anticipate and manage even large scale vulnerabilities. Okay, let us come to a very interesting and important slide, reverse stress testing. Now, reverse stress testing inverts the normal process. Instead of starting with a scenario and estimating losses, it actually begins with a defined endpoint, usually firm failure. And it asks what combination of events could bring us to that point. So it is essentially a backward looking thought experiment to uncover fragilities in the system. Now, one simple way to perform it is by examining past crises and asking how much worse they would have to become to cause a total firm failure. For example, a firm might find that a recession 2 or 3 times more severe than 2008 would exhaust all its capital buffers. This provides a sense of, you can say, the limits of the resilience of the organization. However, simply scaling past data is only a rough approximation, as we've already seen. So we have to use adjusted historical scenarios or model-based searches, because we know that during the times of crisis, correlations break down, volatility increase, and that is why we need to have model-based searches. We need to incorporate GDP, unemployment, equity prices, and interest rate fluctuations in the models properly. Now, once the models are built, the analysts can explore combinations of those core factors to identify scenarios that could lead to failure. Now, these results they feed into management and stress testing committees, which helps management identify vulnerabilities and implausible outcomes. Okay, this helps to decide how to go about risk mitigation and capital planning as well. Okay. So reverse stress testing does not forecast the future, you can say. It defines the boundary of survival, you can say. By asking what would make the institution fail, it actually reveals the vulnerabilities the management must address before this stress turns into a crisis. Okay, now let us discuss regulatory stress testing. Now, so far we have focused on the stress tests which are designed by the institutions themselves internally, you can say. Regulatory stress testing, however, it is mandated by supervisors to evaluate the resilience of the entire financial system. So it applies to banks as well as insurers, and it ensures that they can withstand systemic shocks. Now, in the US, the most recognized framework is the CCAR, Federal Reserve's Comprehensive Capital Analysis and Review. Now, this test applies to large banks with consolidated assets exceeding $50 billion, and it requires them to assess capital adequacy under both normal as well as crisis conditions. Now, for smaller institutions, typically those between $10 billion to $50 billion in assets, are covered by the Dodd-Frank Act stress test, which means, or DFAST, you can say. Now, DFAST uses similar macroeconomic scenarios, but it does not require banks to submit a formal capital plan. Now, in both CCAR as well as DFAST, banks evaluate performance under baseline, adverse, severely adverse, and internal scenarios. These assessments test how shocks to GDP, unemployment, market prices, and interest rates would affect capital and liquidity positions. Now, for institutions with large trading or counterparty exposures, additional components such as global market shock and a counterparty default event are included. So banks must submit their capital plans and model documentation properly. And those failing the tests may be required to raise additional capital or limit dividends until they meet the regulatory standards. Okay, now this is important. Regulators use the outcomes to decide whether a bank must raise additional capital, adjust the dividend, or you can say strengthen its supervisory action over risk management policies. So the goal is consistency and comparability across institutions, ensuring that all of them can survive a deep recession or market stress. So regulatory stress testing provides a structured, transparent check on financial resilience. Frameworks like CCAR, DFAST, they actually promote confidence that largest institutions or even the mid-sized ones, they can endure severe downturns without threatening systemic stability. So regulatory stress testing is very, very important. Okay, let's talk about governance in stress testing. The board of directors, it provides high level oversight and it sets the tone for the firm's stress testing framework. So it determines the overall risk appetite, the it defines the stress testing approach, you can say. It ensures that scenarios and assumptions are appropriate. So while the board does not run the tests itself, its role is to challenge the management, question all the assumptions, and insist on prudent interpretation of the results. It would also feel empowered to request new or modified scenarios whenever they are required. Now, senior management. Senior management is responsible for implementing the framework which is approved by the board. Okay, they must ensure that stress tests are executed by qualified staff. Competent execution is important, using reliable models, reliable data, and the findings are reported promptly. So management must also adapt scenarios to changing market realities, and it should avoid mechanical repetition. Okay, effective stress testing evolves, right? It reflects new risks, it shifting macroeconomic conditions and updated technologies. Then you have the internal audit. The internal audit, it actually, this function provides independent assurance of the entire stress testing process. It verifies that stress testing is performed by appropriately skilled personnel, that documentation and governance standards are maintained, okay, and procedures are independently validated. Again, audit also does not perform the stress tests. It just assesses their consistency across the institution, and it recommends improvements in governance, improvements in controls, responsibilities. Audit findings and recommendations are communicated to senior management and the board to enhance the overall robustness. Enterprise-wide focus. Both the board as well as the senior management, they must ensure that stress testing is enterprise-wide. This means consistent scenarios across all business lines, aggregated results that capture correlations, and comprehensive coverage of both capital as well as liquidity assessment and liquidity risks. See, ultimately, governance ensures that stress testing not just becomes a kind of a just compliance task, but a discussion making tool which supports capital adequacy and long term resilience. So, governance part in stress testing is extremely important, because strong governance is what makes stress testing credible, you can say. The board sets the vision, okay, the management ensures execution, internal audit validates integrity, and together they create a closed loop of oversight, accountability, and continuous improvement, which turns stress testing into a true pillar of risk management. Okay, policies, validation, and independent review. Let's start with policies and procedure. Now, any sound stress testing framework, it begins with clear written policies and procedures. These define why stress testing is conducted, the objective basically, who is responsible, what are the rules, and how frequently it should be conducted. Now, policies ensure that all business units, they follow consistent practices, whether it is about designing scenarios, it is about interpreting result, or reporting to regulators. They also guide how results are used in risk management decisions and ensure updates as the conditions change. Then let's come to validation. Validation focuses on confirming that the models, the methodologies, and even the assumptions are conceptually sound. Okay, so this includes ensuring that relationships between risk factors behave realistically under stress. For example, we've discussed this multiple times, that correlations increase and recovery rates fall during crisis. This has to be recognized. Now, unlike VAR models, which can be statistically backtested as we discussed earlier, Stress testing validation is more judgment based because data on rare events is limited. So, as a result, comparing outcomes across multiple models and scenarios, it actually provides and it requires sound judgment and it provides a very good insight. Then let's come to independent review. It provides an additional layer of assurance. Okay, the reviewers must be separate from the teams that perform the stress testing. Their role is to ensure that stress tests follow the policy, models are robust, models are transparent, and that qualitative judgments are well documented. Reviews also check that vendor acquired models they meet the same standards as internal models or not. So ultimately, independent reviews they give the board and the regulators the confidence that the results are reliable and the processes are unbiased. Finally, documentation. Now, thorough documentation is very, very important. It is underestimated, but it is extremely important. It ensures continuity when important employees leave, say support staff, support system changes, and comprehensive documentation. It actually it promotes a lot of confidence in the results. It is important to understand the limitations also when you are doing the documentation. Limitations also should be documented, which ensures proper accountability. So you can say that strong governance it relies on structure, evidence, and independence. Clear policies ensure consistency, validation ensures credibility, independent reviews ensure integrity. Together, they make stress testing not just a modeling exercise, but a disciplined process that management and regulators can trust. Okay, Basel stress testing principles. Now, the Basel Committee made stress testing a core part of modern risk management after the 2007 2008 financial crisis. It emphasized that stress testing must be rigorous, comprehensive, and forward looking, designed not to predict the future but to test the bank's resilience under severe but plausible shocks. The same thing which we have been discussing again and again. So, the objective is to evaluate whether banks hold enough capital and liquidity to absorb major losses or not. Stress testing helps to identify vulnerabilities in assumptions also, and it provides a structured way to plan for recovery or contingency measures. Now, Basel's principles they define multiple roles for stress testing, providing forward-looking assessments of risk, overcoming model limitations, guiding internal and external communication, setting the firm's risk tolerance, and these insights flow directly into capital and liquidity planning. Now, after the calm years before the crisis, many banks grew complacent. We have seen that in the Foundations of Risk Management chapter. So, Basel's message was very clear. When the markets are quiet, that is when stress testing is most important to avoid underestimating risk on over reliance on historical data. Okay. Now, the Basel principles stress governance at the highest level. Board members and senior executives must participate directly in defining objectives, scenarios, and interpreting results. The banks that performed best during the 2008 crisis were those banks whose top management used stress testing as a strategic tool. Now, methodologically, Basel highlighted the need for aggregation across the entire bank. Prior to the crisis, many stress tests were confined to the individual business lines, ignoring interaction between the portfolios. So, the revised approach mandates consistent enterprise wide scenarios that capture these contagion effect and cross link interaction, the systemic linkages. Basel also identified gaps in scope, especially on the underestimation of liquidity risk, counterparty credit exposures, and risk in structured products. So, stress tests now must include these interconnected elements to ensure realistic impact assessment. In 2017, the committee released updated principle reflecting post crisis learning. So, these emphasize adaptability, cross risk integration, and the alignment of stress testing with both strategic planning and supervisory expectations. So you can say that the Basel stress testing principles they actually elevated stress testing from a model validation tool to kind of a cornerstone of strategic risk management. Okay, by demanding strong governance and adaptability, Basel ensures that stress testing remains relevant even as markets, risks, as well as institutions evolve. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our discussion on this chapter on stress testing. As I said earlier, this was one of the more theoretical chapters in FRM Part 1, and we tried to cover it as comprehensively as possible, exactly in line with the GARP learning objectives. So, our goal, you can say, throughout was to break it into logical parts, how stress tests are designed, their objectives, types, regulatory importance, Basel principles. See, remember this topic connects directly with other risk management tools as we have discussed: VAR, expected shortfall, even scenario analysis. So, when you revise, think about how stress testing complements those methods rather than viewing it in isolation. So, from an exam perspective, questions will test your conceptual clarity, differences between VAR based measures, stress testing, rule of regulators, the CCAR and DFAST test, key stress testing principle of Basel's, how these frameworks fit together, what purpose each serves. So, if you've done these things, you've understood these things, you are probably prepared for the exam well. Okay. So, prepare well. Thank you so much for watching. All the best. Namaste. I'll see you in the next session.